admired friend Stuart Scott, I made a proposal to the organizers of this wonderful event to invite Stuart to do this presentation because I know that he has some important warnings to make. We met a few months after I was elected president of IEE in 2015. By the way, I make a parenthesis for clarification to pronounce the acronym of our society in English. I prefer the solution adopted in Brazil, not to spell, but to express acronyms always as a word. In our case, ISEE would be in English, IC. I like this coincidence. Seeing, perceiving reality as it is on a holistic fashion is a task of our society, founded by scholars who were against ignoring the ecological dimension in economic processes. Coincidentally, a challenge of this event is to open up the space for new possibilities for building alternative livelihoods and economies that can take us beyond a capitalist economy that requires ever-expanding growth. Will we go back to business as usual with all the ecological, social, and economic risks that will bring, or take the path towards a new kind of economy that provides for human needs of all while restoring and protecting the natural world that we all depend on? When I was IC's president-elect, my friend, Peter May, had the good idea to introduce me to Stuart because I wanted to do something in line with what the papal encyclical Laudato Si, published in May 2016, proposed. Stuart too. Our 2016 biennial meeting was shortly after the publication of the encyclical. Stuart and I met in Washington before the event. We soon began to think of a way to talk to Pope Francis and Cardinal Peter Turkson, the then chairman of the Holy See's Commission on Justice and Peace. Access to an audience in the Vatican with the possibility of talking to the Supreme Pontiff was achieved thanks to my good Argentine friend, Attilio Boron, a Marxist political scientist and atheist. A friend of his knew Francis' private secretary, Father Fabian Padocchio, an Argentinian, both economist and priest. I got to the latter, to Fabian Padocchio, an Argentinian, both economist priest, and asked about a meeting with the Pope. He told me, first of all, that we could choose a date to go to Rome. I said that the 23rd of November, 2016, among other possibilities. There was no guarantee of an individual conversation with the Pope. We would have to try a way to do that. To that end, Stuart then came up with an interesting idea, thanks to UN Climate Conference with Archbishop Serafim Kikotis of the Greek Orthodox Church, his chief prelate in Zimbabwe, who could form a group of up to 5 people to go to the audience. I was going already with my wife, Vera, and Stuart. Key quotes then could be included. Stuart signed him up for IC, paying the annual fee out of his pocket. We went to Rome on the scheduled day. Coates, however, was unable to go, but his name was among ours on the list of those authorized for the Pope's audience with IC. Through these rules, on the way of the meeting, speaking to the ceremonial authorities, Stuart managed to get us out of the crowd of 1,000 anonymous people to a knot of about 100 who would be close to the Pope, and from there to the 25 who would speak to His Holiness. We entered St. Peter's Square with a white ticket, changed to a green ticket, and ended with a yellow one, which would take us to 25 seats marked in the first row of seats in the audience room. We would be the privileged ones to meet face-to-face with Francis. We sat down together with the Argentine ambassador to Costa Rica and his wife. When the religious part of the meeting ended, the Pope came to speak with us. I had 5 minutes before because my wife, Vera, didn't speak. 3 were left for Stuart, who had the support of the ambassador's wife in his plea. Stuart even handed to the Pope his business card. He previously prepared a set of papers for me to hand over to Francis, reinforcing what I was going to say. I spoke about IC, and Francisco showed interest to know what ecological economics is. I explained quickly, speaking Spanish, and showed a brief text of mine on the subject, which was with the documents delivered. There was among them a request for a conversation with Cardinal Turkson, which we had not been able to obtain before. 4 days later, the Cardinal called Stuart and set the chat for November the 3rd. It did occur and became an excellent 1-hour conversation about the encyclical and what could be done in relation to it involving IC. We became friends with Turkson, which allowed Stuart to come back in April to the Cardinal with João Martínez Allier, then spending 4 hours talking about environmental injustice and conflicts, mining, destruction of the environment, and so on. Thus, Stuart played an important role in establishing a relationship between IC and the Cardinal Peter Turkson, the Vatican's point person on matters of ecology and integral human development. I mentioned this as an example of Stuart's importance in my IC presidency. He went on to provide me with strategic suggestions pertaining to how we might get ecological economics to be widely recognized globally as a holistic alternative to the current destructive neoclassical growth economics. It was thus that he was assigned the role of strategy consultant to the board. At the same time, he started producing video programs called Climate Matters with other members of IC, such as Philip Long, Madhavi Venkatasan, and Stanislav Chmelev at the COP23 talks in Bonn, Germany, in 2017. And he got IC to become an observer party to the UNFCCC sponsored climate negotiations. In 2018, at COP24 in Katowice, Poland, the student had the rare opportunity to of introducing Greta Thunberg to the assembled world press. He discovered her in Sweden shortly before and took her to Katowice, become friends with the girl's parents, Svante and Malena. From there, Greta became a worldwide success, as all of you know. Well, I see owes Stuart this meaningful discovery, and he never made a point of introducing himself as Greta's promoter. Already second at COP25 in Madrid last year, he did not carry out any more activities with her. We desired, however, to take Greta to the IC 2020, which was scheduled for Manchester. I even talked about it with her father, Svante, but Stuart's intermediation was basic in the case, and it couldn't happen. In Rome, November 2016, we spent 2 weeks to carry out our compensation project with the Pope and Cardinal Turkson. We visited the Holy See several times, and we took the opportunity to exchange ideas. That was when Stuart's militant warrior spirit became evident to me. We talked a lot about the insanity of economic growth and the destructive role of money in the world. I then introduced him to the book by the late Hans Binswanger, a brilliant Swiss economist, my friend. Money and Magic, a critic of the modern economy in the light of Goethe's Faust, German original edition 1985, English translation 1994. With his stockbroker experience on Wall Street at Merrill Lynch, Stuart had a lot to say to us. His passage through the Temple of Money ceased in 2008. Stuart broke with this type of economic disaster, promoter, and embarked on a career of service to humanity and life on earth. He has worked tirelessly since that time in an effort to stop the headlong rush of the industrialized world over the precipice of ecological chaos. In fact, his struggle turned to saving life on the planet. One of the points in this regard is his criticism of the type of meeting that IC held until 2018. Mid-19 conference in all. His understanding led to the plea for virtual conference. At first, I didn't adhere to the proposal, but I am now convinced that this is our path. Stuart and Josh, by the way, are right. So this is how I want to introduce Stuart here, saying of my admiration for him, added since the beginning of 2019 for witnessing his struggle for his own life, without forget that his greatest commitment is to fight for life on earth. This is the result of his position to fight money and the abomination that is growth economics. Stuart's heroic warrior spirit can be motto he adopted after he got ill, writing for a while at the end of his message, a quote from Sir Andrew Barton, a 15th century Scottish sailor who gained notoriety as a privateer. skills in battle and memorialized in English and Scottish folk songs. Fight on, my men. I am hurt, but I am not slain. I will lay me down and bleed a while, and then I will rise and fight again. Of course, Stuart shares the heroic side of the quote without the notoriety of the privateer who uttered it. I am therefore delighted, honored, to introduce you to my admired friend and strategy consultant, Stuart Scott. And I finish. Thanking you for your attention and wishing you all love. Thank you.
Thank you, Clovis. And if things are working correctly, we should have the video in just a moment.
Agora ele vai entrar.
I'm honored to have been given an opportunity to speak on the first day of this seminal colloquium. I've been urging, pushing, and at times rudely shoving from the sidelines for some years now in an effort to get the ISEE and now the Degrowth Biennial Conference to be conducted entirely online. There have always been objections, even from those who agreed with me in principle. But we, of all organizations, must lead the way out of the old fly to a city paradigm of academic and professional conferences. It was clear that this was in itself a destructive part of the overall paradigm of how our species conducts itself on a finite planet. My closest allies objected that the human interaction over coffee, chance conversations in the hallways, etc., were reasons to continue with the old paradigm. I, in turn, argued that an unlimited number of side video chat rooms could be integrated for those attending virtually to interact in privacy and more intimately than in the hallways of some conference center. The lure of exotic destinations also played a strong part, I'm sure. If one's university would pay the expenses, why not fly to Puebla, Mexico, Reykjavik, Iceland, or Manchester, England for a paid working vacation? We are all subject to these subtle and overt lures and perks. However, in so doing, we have engaged, whether knowingly or unwittingly, in the complacency, as opposed to a conspiracy, of ignoring the effect our actions would have on the very survival of future generations of humanity. That is, our children and all of life on Earth. This willful avoidance of consequences is a terrible price that our children will have to pay, and we who grew up in the age of privilege could ignore for a few years more. Now, with the assistance of our tiny friend, the coronavirus, everything has changed. It cannot be lost on this esteemed audience that the global neoclassical economy and those who rule it, the central banks and their political pawns, are fighting stridently to send us back to the old growth paradigm. They seek to continue the neoclassical war against ordinary economics, as Nicholas Georgescu-Rogan put it. Their strategy will include resuming climate negotiations that bring tens of thousands of well-intended negotiators and observers from around the world to remote cities in an effort supposed to reduce our collective carbon emissions. This occurs despite it being amply apparent that there has been no reduction in the amount or even the rate of emissions since the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, out of which these negotiations arose. In fact, perversely, many nations ramp up their emissions in the years before seminal agreements are expected to be made so as to grandfather in higher baselines. My considered opinion, shared by many, is that the climate negotiations are a fraud being perpetrated on humanity as a cover for the continued growth economic paradigm. I believe this audience is more likely to agree than demur from my conclusion. I call it the annual ritual of kicking the can down the road. The one exception in all this time is the help our little friend COVID has given in disrupting the global growth economy. Now let me get more down to the nitty-gritty in my attack on the neoclassical status quo. It's not just the economic rule book itself that is the game plan for domination of humanity by means of wealth, power, and privilege. It's the very concept and manifestation of that which we call money. And here I use a capital M to denote money, since the term has many minor meanings, but one virtually unknown major one. Money is not just the stuff in your pocket or wallet, the medium of exchange, the store of value, or the claim against future production. Money is a viral meme. It is a body of law, custom, and tradition that passes itself from generation to generation and nation to nation. Money is a non-genetic virus of the human mind, a sort of cancer, like the genetic cancers, which does not realize that with its destruction of the host comes its own destruction. And like its physical cancer cousin, it seeks to grow as quickly as possible. Money has harnessed humanity for its own reproductive purposes. What do most of us do? We work. Why? For money. Look at that very statement. We work for money. It can be parsed in two distinct ways. We work so that we can receive money, or we work at the behest of money. Money has managed to write itself into law so that for most corporations, at least in the economically dominant nations, the prime directive is the financial bottom line, the maximization of shareholder profit. If there's a decision to be made that will preserve the habitability of Earth, such as the abandonment of tar sands exploitation that despoils huge tracts of virgin forests for eons of time, but will reduce financial profit to the corporation, the CEO and management must, by law, make the decision against the natural world, the biodiversity of the area, and the rights of indigenous peoples who have cared for the land from time immemorial, but who bear no legal title to the land. Even should they bear title through some treaty with the European invaders or their descendants, the treaties are abrogated under the collusion between corporations and the supposedly democratically elected or appointed leaders. Money rules. Communist regimes like China and fake democracies like Cambodia need not go through the formalities of congressional or parliamentary abrogation. Cryptocurrencies do not solve anything. They just make the problem more intractable, removing from the light of day the passage of huge fortunes in a way that makes Swiss bank accounts irrelevant. They also permit further domination of humanity by the powers that would be masters. But even the masters are under the control of money. Even abominations like Donald Trump are under the complete control of the meme of money. Just think about it. He's been promoted to the position he's in by the meme of money, precisely because he's complete servant to his master. He can do nothing else. He's incapable of empathy, kindness, conscience, or compassion. He's the perfect servant of money. And it is his own enslavement to money and power that has driven the United States into the position of having about a quarter of all COVID infections on Earth, while the US population is well under 5% of the total population. I'll boldly assert that if humanity cannot change the meme of money and its neoclassical economic playbook, then we're doomed. We may already be doomed to societal collapse, but we may also be doomed to extinction due to the lag time between our destruction of the ecosphere and the resulting inability of humanity to grow food in the current frozen polar wastelands, which will gradually assume temperatures for half the year within which our species might otherwise survive. To clarify this point, the Summit supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Laboratories in the United States predicts a blue ocean event to occur in the Arctic within the next 3 years, and perhaps as soon as this year. This anticipated event will mark the flipping of the reflectance, or albedo, of the Arctic from net reflector to net absorber of incoming radiation. At that point, planetary heating will accelerate markedly. The inevitable result will be that the only habitable zones will become the extreme northern and southern latitudes, where rocky boreal forests have not developed sufficient topsoil for agricultural use. I'm not an academic per se, and I don't have a research paper to present. My work might be classified as observational science, and I refer to myself as an eco-social strategist and systems thinker. It's said that I'm a skilled communicator of complex scientific and technical information to open-minded people of moderate intelligence of all ages. I hope I've made some sense and left some lasting impressions in this highly intelligent and academically accomplished audience. Thank you for allowing me to present my considered observations, gathered over several decades, and the conclusions I've drawn from them. They are part of the legacy I leave behind, as I am suffering from a form of cancer from which I am told there is no remission. So besides the chemotherapy and dietary discipline, I am left praying for a miracle. In closing, I will express the hopeful prayer that we in the combined ecological economics and degrowth communities learn this lesson deeply and never again hold fly to a city conferences. When and if the age of COVID passes, local gatherings with low carbon footprints can provide all the contact we need, since indeed we are a social species. These local gatherings can be digitally connected to a hub, as we have amply proven is both possible and preferable. Again, thank you very much for my opportunity to present these thoughts.